John, I did my doctorate in brain science, and if I would talk to the vast majority of my colleagues who are brain scientists today, that I might even entertain the idea that there is something not physical about the mind or about consciousness, you would think I committed a crime.
Mhm.
Uh, can one be justified having that wonder?
Yes, I believe you can be justified, and you are justified, ironically, in part on scientific grounds. I mean, look, there are several different possibilities here, at least in the abstract. You could think that consciousness is reducible, perhaps, to something physical we know now. It could be reducible to something physical we will know in the future, even if we don't know it now. It might not be reducible in either of those two ways and yet be caused by some physical process, one we know now or will know in the future. Or it could be in some way metaphysically free-floating, maybe even foundational in the way that you'd get with some sort of religious pantheism, perhaps. Now, I think the jury's still out, ought to be out anyway, on which of these is true. So I think that the questioning, the wondering is justified. Now, why do I say on scientific grounds? It's because science itself shows us that we may be at a very, very early stage in this whole process of intelligent inquiry on our planet. I mean, the results from geology and from astronomy, among other sciences, show us that the Earth still has a lot of life left in it. It's been around for a long time, and we're getting used to that. We're getting used to what we call the deep past, and we wonder at how it's taken so long to get to us. And then we stop. We don't think about how things are going to go trundling on into the future, perhaps for another billion years, science tells us. I use this device in my classes sometimes. I'll say, well, here's a line, all right, and I'll draw a 20-foot line across two wide blackboards, and I'll say, this line represents the whole period of time in which there may be intelligent life on our planet. A billion years.
It could even be more, several billion.
Or it could be, yeah. It depends on who you listen to, but at least a billion. I'm going to be conservative, right? So what proportion of that line do you think we've already traversed? And the estimates I get from students are invariably far too generous, because the correct estimate, well, it depends on where you think we started. If you think we started 100,000 years ago, which is a very generous estimate, thinking about inquiry on our planet, you'd have only a 1/42nd of an inch. 1/42nd of an inch. If you bring it forward, as you very well might think you ought to do, cut that in half, 50,000 years maybe, okay? Well, 1/83rd of an inch. It gets even smaller. And if you think about the time in which we've had civilization, in which people have been able to sit around and think about things like, where does consciousness come from? It's something like 1/700th of an inch. And if you think about how long philosophy's been around, about 2,500 years, it's something like 1/1670th of an inch, or something along those lines. It's just incredibly small, invisibly small at the beginning of that 20-foot line. So that's what science itself tells us to think about when we think about how things might be in the future of inquiry.
What do you call this mode of thinking about time?
Well, I have started to call what we should be aiming at in respect of this time-based thinking temporal contextualization. I call it that because what we're really doing is finding our place in time. So we're getting contextualized temporally. We're able to see, well, over here, there's just this little bit of time, very, very small, and over here, yawning chasms, right, of time in which inquiry may develop a whole lot further. And so,
how do you see that in terms of the
consciousness? To come back around to that, that's why, or one way of supporting the claim that all of those options I laid out before are still open. And so your idea that consciousness might be non-physical, that's a fairly modest claim, I would think. And people who are, in fact, science-based in their thinking ought themselves to be open, ought to be skeptical about these things instead of believing one way or the other. And that sort of skepticism I call evolutionary skepticism, is something that opens us up to inquiry instead of closing it down, as skepticism so often has done. So we're opened up to inquiry, including inquiry about consciousness. And in fact, the fact that consciousness is so hard to put away as an issue for science itself shows that we've perhaps got a lot further to go in understanding what needs to be understood about ourselves and our universe.